I grew up in a small, quiet town, one of those places where everybody knows everybody, and the houses seem to have been there forever. My parents moved into an old Victorian house when I was 10, and looking back now, there were always things about it that felt off. The house had a history, of course. What old house doesn't? I remember the neighbors whispering about it. They'd say, "The house on Elm Street has been around since the late 1800s. Lots of people have lived there, but not for long." I didn't think much of it back then. Kids are curious, sure, but we don't pay attention to things like ghost stories or creaky floorboards until you start hearing things, until it starts feeling like you're being watched. It started small, just little things. At night, I would sometimes hear soft, dragging footsteps across the floor above me when I was trying to sleep. My room was on the second floor, right under the attic. It wasn't the house settling, it was different, like someone or something was pacing, restless. I told my parents, of course. They laughed it off, thinking I was just being a kid with an overactive imagination. They said the old wood and the way the house was built could make strange noises. So I tried to ignore it, tried to sleep through it, but the noises got worse. One evening, I stayed up late, reading a book. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the occasional creak of the floorboards. Then I heard it, a whisper, barely a breath. It sounded like someone right next to me, but when I turned, there was nothing there. I froze, staring at the empty corner of the room. The air felt cold, and I swear I saw something, a shadow, move just out of the corner of my eye. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was in that house with me. One night I woke up to the unmistakable sound of footsteps again. This time, they were closer. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up as I slowly turned my head toward the door. There, just beyond the threshold, stood a figure, tall, thin, and impossibly still. It was a man, or at least it looked like one, but his features were blurry, as though he was made of mist. I blinked, and in that moment, he was gone. I ran downstairs to my parents' room, my heart pounding. I couldn't go back to sleep. They were concerned but didn't know what to say. The house had always been old, and the attic especially seemed to have its own atmosphere. After that night, they started locking the attic door, but that didn't help. The worst night came a week later. I was lying in bed, wide awake, when I saw it. The shadow hovering just at the edge of my room. It was no longer just a fleeting thing out of the corner of my eye. It was solid now, slowly inching toward me, moving like it was deliberately trying to keep its presence known. My heart was hammering in my chest as it stopped at the foot of my bed, almost as if it was waiting. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The figure stood there for what felt like hours, its presence suffocating, and then, as quickly as it had come, it vanished. The next morning, I told my parents what had happened. I expected them to brush it off again, but this time they didn't. My mom looked pale, and my dad seemed unusually quiet. That was when they told me the truth. The house had been empty for years before we moved in. The previous owners had left suddenly. No one knew why. But there were rumors, and some people said they had heard things too. A family had lived there before, and the story was that the father had died under mysterious circumstances, but his spirit never left. They said he watched over the house, waiting. That's when I understood. It wasn't just the house that was old, it was the presence within it, a presence that wasn't content with just fading away. Things didn't stop after that night. The shadow returned, and sometimes I'd catch glimpses of it out of the corner of my eye. But eventually I grew used to it. I learned that not all ghosts are vengeful. Not all spirits are trying to hurt you. Some just want to be seen. Some just want to remind you that they were once here, and now they never really leave. We stayed in that house for another 2 years before we moved away. I don't know what happened to the house after that, but I often wonder if the next family will feel the same presence we did. Maybe they'll hear the footsteps too, or feel the cold chill. Maybe they'll see the figure standing in the dark, watching over them, just as he watched over me. Because sometimes, when the night is quiet and the wind is howling, the things we can't explain are the things that stay with us the longest.